Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to our listeners worldwide. I am Doreet Oren, Director of Product Marketing at Gilat Satellite Networks. As many of you know, Gilat is a leading global provider of end-to-end SATCOM solutions. We have experience in delivering complex projects and services worldwide, in addition to developing the ground segment equipment. Gilat is in this business for over 25 years, with over 1 million terminals shipped to more than 90 countries. Gilat operates with over 20 sales offices and 5 R&D centers throughout the world. As a matter of fact, Gilat has been a world leader in rural telephony already in the 90s, and now is leading with mobile broadband solutions, once again in these familiar regions worldwide. Gilat has over 3,000 satellite backhaul sites deployed worldwide with over 50 leading cellular mobile operators. See here on the slide some of our customers around the globe. For instance, TIM in Brazil, China Telecom, Orange in Africa, and Telstra and Optus in Australia. I am pleased to be hosting today Keren, Gilat's Director for Cellular Solutions. Mr. Keren has recently joined Gilat, bringing vast experience in the telecom industry. Before we get started, just a small procedural issue. If you want to ask questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat box. We will address your questions at the end of the webinar, or we'll get back to you directly. Now, let's go over the agenda. Please turn to slide 3. In today's webinar, we would like to discuss the changes happening in the industry and how these changes are bringing MNO opportunities for LTE deployment. First, I will briefly discuss some of the market trends in the mobile and satellite industry and point out how the convergence of these trends presents new opportunities for mobile network operators. Then I will share with you what we've been hearing from the MNOs on today's challenges in deploying an LTE network. We have seen that today, new satellite communication technologies are well addressing these challenges. Nevertheless, there are some misconceptions about satellite backhaul communication that may affect the MNO's decision in using a satellite backhaul. So in this webinar, we will dispel these misconceptions, and we will show how indeed the game has changed. Mr. Keren will discuss how satellite backhaul for an LTE network can provide an excellent user experience, matching terrestrial performance. And then he will go through a business case to show that also the high OPEX misconception is dispelled. We will then take your questions and conclude the webinar. I'd like now to discuss several market trends. See the convergence of trends on slide 4. We are now at a turning point where there is a convergence of trends from the mobile industry with significant advancements in the satellite industry. And this convergence is now joined with innovative technology achievements coming from us, from Gilat. This convergence is bringing MNOs new opportunities for rapid LTE network deployment. It is known that smartphones have become so prevalent worldwide. As a matter of fact, they are the fastest growing of any consumer technology in history. In looking at this chart on slide 5, we see that in 2014, there were 2.7 billion smartphone subscriptions, and that in 2020, 6.1 billion smartphone subscriptions are expected. These numbers are mind-boggling and clearly hard to grasp. The point to be made is that this insatiable need for data communication has brought about the very rapid migration from 3G networks to LTE. See in this chart on slide 6 the growth in LTE subscribers. 3.5 billion LTE subscribers are expected by 2020. And about half of all smartphones will be using LTE by 2020. That's less than 5 years away. From the satellite side, we are also seeing very significant changes. Most, if not all, satellite operators are launching high-throughput satellites, known as HTS, and are drastically changing the satellite industry. This game changer has to do with the economics. The tremendous increase in capacity is dramatically reducing bandwidth costs by an order of magnitude. If we look again at the year 2020, we see that the cost per month per 1 megabit per second is expected to drop by 70%, from $2,000 to around $700 or even less. The up-and-coming multi-spot beam technology allows reusing the same frequencies and multiple beams in smaller geographies, which increases overall satellite capacity and thus reduces cost. Let's now look at the MNO challenges in deploying LTE networks, and let's see how these challenges can be overcome. We will also examine the satellite backhaul misconceptions and separate myths from facts. See on slide 9. I'd like to take these points one at a time. The first point, limited LTE coverage area. This refers to the fact that LTE network expansion poses challenges often due to the current proximity of the cells. Providing LTE coverage may require additional cells in the same coverage areas, since the current infrastructure is likely to be insufficient. The second point, need to deploy quickly before the competition, is about speed of deployment. In this fast-growing market, often there is no room for second place. MNOs are challenged with providing LTE service before their competitors. And the third point, do not want to pay high roaming charges, stresses the loss of revenue and subscriber base to the competition. This is as a result of being late in providing the LTE network. This not only reduces additional potential revenue, but also costs significant roaming fees that must be paid to the incumbent. And the fourth challenge is the regulatory licensing issue. This is about the government regulations often requiring coverage in remote areas for political reasons. Now, these regulations are often a condition for providing the 4G licensing terms. So the MNOs often must install the network quickly in these regions before setting up a network in the higher revenue generating regions. So the question we are here to address is, how can these four challenges best be overcome? When it comes to cellular backhauling, the MNO is presented with several options. The common solutions are terrestrial, such as fiber or microwave. However, satellite backhauling has significant benefits that I would like to briefly go through. With satellite backhauling, geographic coverage is unlimited and there are no line-of-sight problems. Satellite backhauling eliminates the need to install fiber over long distances. The reliability is very high, not suffering from the terrestrial hazards. So in addition, the speed of deployment is unmatched and often a major advantage. And due to the high throughput satellites and TDMA technology, we are seeing very significant cost reduction, making satellite backhaul no longer a niche solution. But can satellite backhauling deliver for high throughput LTE networks? That's what people have been asking, and we say definitely. Excuse me. In this presentation, we will go over the common misconceptions and dispel them. On slide 11 are the four most common misconceptions regarding suitability of satellite backhauling for LTE. The first misconception, satellite performance does not meet true LTE speeds. The second misconception, that of course we will dispel, satellite latency causes delay which cannot be overcome. The third misconception, unstable satellite links cause low quality communication. And the fourth misconception that we will dispel is that satellite backhauling has high OPEX and therefore is not an option. Stay tuned to hear how Gilat has dispelled all these four myths. I'll briefly counter these misconceptions one at a time, and then Mr. Keren will further elaborate. The first myth on slide 12 has been dispelled with Gilat's Capricorn VSAT modem, the fastest VSAT on the market. Capricorn supports speeds of up to 200 megabits per second, enabling the equivalent of terrestrial user experience for LTE networks over satellite backhauling. The second myth regarding the performance degradation due to satellite latency has been dispelled by Gilat's embedded TCP/GTP acceleration techniques. The boost in performance provided here has been proven to reach the maximum handheld device performance. I would like to spend a few minutes on this remarkable achievement. We provided embedded acceleration. In other words, this is done in the VSAT with no additional boxes or network management systems. This not only saves on power and space, but most importantly, eliminates significant packet loss, which happens when multiple boxes are used. Please note that without a single box, there is no quality of service feedback between the external accelerator and the VSAT, therefore causing packet loss. Quality of service parameters are updated every tens of milliseconds in the Capricorn VSAT, thus eliminating packet loss. In addition, I want to stress that this achievement was field proven. Gilat's embedded acceleration was already tested with the large eNode B vendors. One of the popular ways to measure the user experience is the speed test on the device itself. We achieved 150, that's 150 megabit per second for download and 10 megabits per second for upload on the handset. Please note on the actual handset, not just on the VSAT. This remarkable achievement was not only about the fantastic user experience and the traffic integrity, but we also demonstrated full integration with the core and eNode B. We showed performance over satellite of full OAM, which means operation, administration, and maintenance of the eNode Bs. Now on slide 14 for the third myth regarding the stability of the backhaul links. This misconception is dispelled as well. Gilat has been providing high-quality, stable performance in the worst weather conditions with high frequencies. This general issue is addressed with industry standards of DVB-S2 and DVB-RCS. I would like to point out that on top of these standards, Gilat has developed unique algorithms to mitigate the fade that often interferes with satellite communication. Gilat's adaptive transmission maximizes service uptime both in the uplink and downlink direction. There are three algorithms that I would like to briefly mention that Gilat has developed. One, an ACM margin manager, including innovative dual link margin for KA networks. Two, uplink power control. And three, the self-adapting automatic dynamic channels based on the fade conditions. If you would like further information on these algorithms, please be in touch with us and we will be happy to elaborate. And now on slide 15, I'd like to address the fourth myth. I would like to dismiss the cost misconception. In dispelling this myth, there are 2 points. First, on the left, the first point was mentioned earlier. High throughput satellites with multi-spot beams are changing the game dramatically by reducing the OPEX by an order of magnitude. And the second point is about the access scheme. For a viable cost-effective solution, bandwidth sharing is required both in the upload direction as well as for download. TDMA is therefore a must. Note that these 2 points are reducing costs so significantly that satellite backhauling is no longer a niche solution. So now that we have dispelled the satellite misconceptions, let's turn to slide 16 to see how the MNO challenges can be overcome with satellite backhauling. The first concern, limited LTE coverage area, addresses the uncovered spots due to the proximity of the cells. This can be efficiently be solved with quick and easy deploy of the satellite backhauling. In other words, the required additional cells for LTE can be added quickly with minimal overhead. The second concern of needing to deploy quickly before the competition, this is mitigated with the fast deployment of satellite communication, which of course improves time to market. Obviously, the quick deploy of satellite backhauling allows beating the competition, thus allowing new subscribers and reducing churn. And the third concern, not wanting to pay for high roaming charges. This is addressed with a native network eliminating the roaming fees. And the last challenge is the regulatory licensing issue. This is about the fact that the TNC, the terms and conditions, mandate quickly reaching remote areas. Now, this is both costly and time-consuming, as you know, but this is made simpler with the fact that satellite licensing is per country, not per site, further simplifying and speeding up the deployment time. I would like now to turn over to Mr. Keren for further drill down on why the satellite game has changed for LTE backhauling. He will start out with drilling down into the performance concern. Now turning to slide 18, please go ahead, Mr. Keren.
Okay, great. Thank you, Doreet, for this very generous introduction. What I'd like to do first is to greet you good morning or good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for allowing me to elaborate a little bit more about the LTE solutions that we have. As Doreet mentioned it earlier, when we're looking at a typical deployment of satellite backhaul capabilities, we're noticing in many ways where the sheer fact that we have an eNode B, or the cell that is a 4G or LTE cell. We have the Capricorn VSAT, or a VSAT that is the modem connecting between the eNode B, the cell itself, and the satellite, plus a power source. That's a basic, I would say, basic installation in order to be able to communicate to the satellite, from the satellite all, to the Earth station or the teleport onto, our hub that is located at the Earth station and connecting into the EPC, or the Enhanced Packet Core, of the mobile network operator. Mentioned earlier, we're able to deliver today with the Capricorn VSAT 150 megabit per second on the downlink, and 10 megabit per second on the uplink. But if we add encryption onto that, sometimes MNOs require that as an added technology to encrypt the traffic over the satellite, and we can add encryption onto that, then we can deliver somewhere up to 110 megabit per second over 10 megabit per second on the uplink. Having said that, I would like to continue further into discussing how we're able to do that. So looking at the actual VSAT, we can allude to several factors that make it the most advanced VSAT in the industry today. First of all, is the speed that it can support. Our VSAT, called the Capricorn, can support up to 200 megabit per second of traffic, which is the fastest in the industry and well within the standards of LTE network, requiring in many cases 100 or even 150 megabit per second user experience. In order to support that, in order to actually support these kind of speeds and user experience, we needed to be able to accelerate the TCP traffic in the GTP tunnel, and we're able to do so with the Capricorn today, and actually listed a patent for that. TDMA technology allows us to use shared bandwidth, which from an OPEX, operating expenses perspective, allows us to use limited bandwidth, but to deliver the same user experience across the board. And also built in within the Capricorn VSAT is the ability to encrypt and to do quality of service every few milliseconds. More importantly is also the ability of the VSAT to send or to send up to 30,000 packets per second as throughput traffic. That is very important and extremely impressive, because today it's somewhere in the area of compatible VSATs in the industry 4 to 5 times more than any other VSAT in the market today. Examining the type of traffic that we're seeing today in data networks like LTE or 4G networks, in different, let's say, to voice traffic of the past. Voice traffic used to be kind of symmetric. I talk for 5 seconds, and then the other side talks for 5 seconds. So we require first continuous connection, and also symmetric traffic. In data, we're looking at asymmetric type of traffic, and it's bursty in a way where we talked about voice in seconds or in minutes. Now we're talking in milliseconds. That means the ability to download what we need, being a file, a picture, or to send information, or to download email. It requires literally milliseconds of time in a very bursty type of mode. So this illustrates very, very nicely how data network or how the data traffic actually behaves. So now we need to examine, does the traditional SCPC type of technology fits the type of traffic that we're seeing 3G and even and ultimately in 4G, and even additional technologies in the future that will be based upon data traffic. So even if with SCPC we are actually installing a dedicated link for each and every, let's say, cell site or eNode B. And if we're looking, let's say here, if we're looking at this particular illustration, we're seeing 10 megabit per second capability as the link, and we can share it being symmetric or asymmetric any which way we want. However, if we want to support traffic of up to 100 megabit per second, that is not enough. And at the same time, we're using, if you're seeing this red area right here, we're wasting a lot of bandwidth at times that the system is not being used, because even if we have multiple users at the same time, it's not an exact the same millisecond. Therefore, fixed capacity wastes tremendous amount of satellite bandwidth, and it does not meet, on the other hand, it does not meet the requirement above it, all the way up to 100 megabit per second. Therefore, we have concluded that SCPC as technology is not the option for both 3G and LTE at the same time, and therefore we need to use TDMA as the prevalent technology for data traffic throughput. How does TDMA work? In essence, in difference to SCPC, where each and every link is dedicated, each and every cell, each and every eNode B has a dedicated bandwidth. In TDMA, in essence, the entire bandwidth is shared across the entire network. So as you see here, we have one site, two sites, or N sites. All the users, what we're seeing, all the users on the network that are registered on the network to use the network actually are able to use it at any given moment. And the satellite bandwidth is looking at all of them and is able to provide specific I would say data or bandwidth for those that actually need it. So if we're looking at a 1 second view or 1 millisecond view, but for instance, 1 second view, we're seeing that there are some active users and then some dormant or inactive users. Those active users, those that in this particular very moment are requiring data either on a download or an upload. And therefore, the system is able to look at them as a whole, as an entire shared bandwidth, and assign to them, or looking at them by actually scanning the network, looking at each one that is requiring data, and assign it through a very elaborate scheme of allocation within the time division multiple access technology. Therefore, when we have a shared bandwidth of 100 million bits per second, if, for instance, the required amount of data within that particular 1 second is only 10 kilobits per second, so in essence, within that 1 second, theoretically, we can service up to 10,000 users with a user experience of 100 megabit per second. So this is the essence of time division multiple access or time division multiplexing. How do we overcome the latency issue? Doreet mentioned in the past that we've been able to literally overcome the latency that is a physical barrier when we have a satellite up in space. 36,000 geostationary satellites are flying at around, at orbit of 36,000 kilometers above the Earth. So when we transmit back and forth through the satellites, we're experiencing a delay. As you can see here, the average delay is somewhere about round trip 600 milliseconds. So if, for instance, we want to provide a user experience of up to 100 megabit per second for a smartphone that using an Android operating system like we're seeing right here, in essence, the eNode B or the cell site is transmitting a window that is typically about the size of 110 kilobytes per window. So when it transmits that window all the way to the core of the network, it waits for the acknowledgement of the core of the EPC to tell them to transmit the second window and onwards and onwards. However, if you have to wait for 600 milliseconds between each window, the most that we can experience is this point right here, which is 2 megabit per second speed, in and around 2 megabit per second speed. And that is obviously not good enough for LTE that requires a user experience of up to 100 or 150 megabit per second. We were able to deploy or to build or to develop a new technology called TCP acceleration within the GTP tunnel that is able to deliver up to 150 megabit per second user experience. How do we do that? In essence, when we're looking at this diagram, without the Gilat acceleration methodology, when we are actually sending a TCP window out, two, or let's say even 1, 2, and 3 windows in succession. I mean, let's say Microsoft allows 2. I think that Android allows also 2 or 3 at one time. We have to wait for the acknowledgement from the core, and only then, after we get the acknowledgement, we can continue to transmit. That is that really hinders the capability of providing continuous speed. When we actually deploy or use the TCP acceleration within the GTP tunnel at Gilat, we actually, as you see right here, we generate the acknowledgement locally between the VSAT and the eNode B, and on the other side between the hub and the EPC. So in essence, the eNode B continues to transmit the windows throughout. Our capability here is to join all the windows into one giant window, and then we broadcast it across on the satellite. That allows us to also examine in the meantime any kind of errors for retransmit. Therefore, the eNode Bs and or the EPC use continuous transmission rather than wait for the acknowledgement for the ACK on both sides. And thus, with the acceleration, we're able to literally deliver the user experience speeds of up to 150 megabit per second. Just to demonstrate this, I would like to show a short video to really give you a feeling of what it really looks like when we are using this, broadcasting, where we're trying to download a file of 25, megabyte across the network with the GTP acceleration and or without. So if you notice on the left side, right around here, it tells you how fast that file is being downloaded seconds-wise. And right here on the right side, it shows you how fast that particular file is being downloaded without the acceleration. So you can see that by the time that the entire file has been downloaded here, about 3% of the file was downloaded without the acceleration. That is how fast we're able to literally deploy and provide the user experience of satellite and overcoming the delay. I would like to also indicate another point of the quality of service. Why quality of service is so important. We're examining, in essence, we're examining the traffic. We're doing deep inspection of the TCP traffic within, again, this is all within one box, one VSAT, um, to allow, let's say, both priorities of packets, let's say voice over data and or control over, let's say, control over voice that have, that are actually very important to the actual transmission, and thus we're able to, we're actually enjoying a very negligible bandwidth, bandwidth waste and also packet loss, and that's indicated right here in the close to the X axle of this table. So we're seeing that in essence we are able to look at each and every part of the traffic just about every 100 milliseconds and adjust it accordingly. When we compare to other competitors that are using external boxes for quality of service and or acceleration of traffic, we're seeing that there's a tremendous increase in both bandwidth waste as well as tremendous loss of packets or packets that are dropped. So that is the big difference that we're seeing, and with both the GTP acceleration, but more importantly, if you remember when I mentioned about the VSAT, is the ability of the VSAT to put up to 30,000 packets per second throughput. In order to just to give you a feeling of have been, Doreet mentioned the fact that we had field tested our system. And I would like to indicate at least one field test that we recently did by a major mobile network operator in Japan. We were called to do this test by this operator. I cannot release the name as of yet because we're still under NDA, but I can tell you that the test results are available and we can send it to you literally if you were interested. So we were required to perform the following. The data needed to be encrypted via AES 256 encryption. We were required to provide a user experience of 100 megabit per second on the download and 10 megabit per second on the upload for that encrypted traffic. We were asked to show voice over LTE, integration with their radio access network that consisted of Huawei ZTE and Nokia eNode Bs, and an Ericsson enhanced packet core, and also show the ability for the network mobile network operators to be able to operate and administer and also maintain the eNode Bs remotely without the VSAT or the satellite delay and throughput affecting that type of operation, and to also show the handover from 3G to 4G and from 4G to 4G from one cell to the next. And therefore, these are some of the results that we were able to show. First, we were actually able to demonstrate on encrypted traffic 100 over 10 megabit per second for single TCP session in the user, in the user equipment. That means in the phone, in the actual handset. Second is we're able to show the voice over LTE at PASC of 3.8, which is a tremendous achievement by itself. This is not easily achieved. We're able to be completely successful with all the major eNode Bs manufacturers, Huawei ZTE, Nokia, and with complete integration with the Ericsson EPC of that particular mobile network operator. Just to show you an indication of the actual test and how we're able to reach the PASC, by the way, looking at PASC, what is PASC is, if you're seeing right here, is perceptual evaluation of speech quality. The test itself this is a slide from the test itself indicating that type of score. Now, the MNO that I'm alluding to in Japan asked for 3. 3 was a score of 3 was a passing grade. We were able to demonstrate almost 20% more, 25% more than that. I would like to also show how, where in the past, the misconception, as we mentioned also, was that satellite backhauling was very expensive, was not economically viable. With TDMA and with the lowering of prices over HTS satellite, I want to also indicate to you that today deploying both at the speeds and at the cost that the mobile network operator is expecting, that deploying cellular backhaul is economically viable. So when we examine how we build a network, we really have to look at the capital expense, the operating expense, and the overhead that is relating to building such a network. So the components are for the CAPEX are the VSAT plus the antenna, the hub itself that is located at the teleport, at the Earth station, and the eNode Bs that are situated at each cell site. The operating expenses are obviously the space segment that we need to utilize, the co-location costs at the teleport, plus the remote site overhead, such as the actual rent being paid to the landowner of which the tower is on, and a fiber connection between the mobile network operator and the Earth station in order to send the traffic onto the mobile network operator. In addition to, we have the overhead that includes the network operating center that monitors the entire system, both at the Earth station and beyond, and the maintenance of the remote sites, plus any upgrades to the remote VSAT. So these are basic, most of the basic components that will consist of building a network. How do we look when we look at the actual cost of it? So in order to build the business case, we have to look at space segment for during wide beam or wideband at the in around 2750. We looked at it about $2,750 per megahertz per month. But on HTS satellite or multi-spot beam satellite, it's in around about 1,400 per megahertz per month. The teleport infrastructure is about $230 per megahertz plus $35 per 1U in a rack. The fiber connection from the teleport to the EPC about $3,500 per month. And the remote site average monthly lease plus electric plus any other issues that are at the remote site around $300 per site. Looking at the CAPEX, and we, in this particular business case, we're depreciating it over five-year period. We have one network segment with redundancy, so it's actually two hubs installed at the teleport. That's around $600,000. A VSAT, including the antenna and the buck, that's around $4,000 each. And an eNode B plus the installation. So we figured that 30% of the network is brand new sites at about $60,000 per site, and about 70% can be installed on the legacy network, either 2G, 3G, or in any other existing infrastructure at about $20,000 per site per eNode. And human overhead for NOC that is operating 24/7, on-site field support, and SatCare, which is the updates and upgrades and of the VSATs at around $17,500 per month. What are the business case assumptions? So right now we would like to build a network that will have 100 sites with 100 eNodes and VSATs. CAPEX, as I mentioned, depreciation of a 5-year period. We would like to have a user experience of up to 100 megabit per second per user. We would like to have up to 135 active users per site at peak hour at any given moment. We would like to have a ratio of 1 to 175 paying customers to active users in peak hour. That means that we have twice as many subscribers as those that are actually using the network at any given moment. And the average use per user per hour in peak hour is about 5 megabytes of download or upload. Altogether, we have calculated, and I'll show you how we actually calculated the required bandwidth in around 74 megahertz which translates to about 170 megabit per second to be able to support up to 23,000, almost 24,000 subscribers on that particular network, and the expected ARPU, average revenue per user, at around $24 per month. Okay, this is $24 per month is what we call the expected ARPU, let's say in a country like China. But in countries like the United States or Canada or other countries in the world, it could be higher. In other countries, it could be lower. So we looked at an average ARPU of $24. This is our bandwidth calculator, where we're taking into consideration just about most of the factors that require us to configure what we're looking. But more importantly, for this particular example, we looked at the average plan, the data plan that is being sold by the mobile network operators, 3.5 gigabytes per month. And we also have a simulator that can simulate to us at, let's say, the maximum efficiency rate of the bandwidth that we're deploying, which is 170 megabit. What would be the user experience if we only had one user at any, let's say, millisecond on the network, or 2 users, 3 users, 4, and so forth. So we're actually able to see that, let's say, 5.5% of the time, if we only have one single user, they will enjoy completely 100 megabit per second experience, where, let's say, if we have 9 at the same time, within that 1 hour, just about 8.5%, the users will experience, let's say, somewhere between 18 and 21 megabit per second. Still, it gives us that 27% of the time, the users will experience speeds of over 50 megabit per second. 50% of the time, users will experience speeds somewhere between 24 and 50 megabit per second, and about 23% of the time, less than 24 megabit per second, but not less than 10, somewhere about, we didn't continue, not less than 10 megabit per second at any given moment. Having said that, when we compare all the elements that will go into building the network, which are those where, right, you see, on a wide beam, that would be just about 36%, that would be the space segment cost. Still, the MNO, the mobile network operator, will enjoy a profit or a gross revenue return of 40%. However, when we look at a high throughput satellites using multi-spot beam, we're seeing close to 60% gross revenue return on an ARPU of $24. So in both cases, it clearly indicates that we do have a business case here that is profitable to the mobile network operator, and that today, with time division, with TDMA, with the ability to accelerate TCP traffic and the cost of the bandwidth of the satellite, that cellular backhaul over satellite is becoming mainstream, and not just in remote cases where it's a must because you don't have any other choice but to use satellite. Therefore, we're seeing it not just in rural places or remote places, but also in semi-rural places, and in some cases even as backup in urban areas. Looking at the mobile network return on investment of the CAPEX, if we're looking at deploying multi-spot beam cost of the space segment, the return is about 13 months return on investment, and in wide beam, it's about 19 months. So that's pretty damn good for just about any mobile network operator having to get the return of their investment within a year or year and a half of operation. I will let Doreet summarize right here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Keren. I would like to summarize and stress the important points that we made during this webinar. Due to the market demand, now is the time to move to LTE networks. The crying need for mobile data communication is requiring a change in the current infrastructure. We have dispelled the misconceptions about satellite backhauling. We have demonstrated that Capricorn addresses both the user experience and the business case in LTE networks. This means that a terrestrial user experience and a viable business case can be achieved. And this is thanks to Capricorn the fastest TDMA VSAT with embedded TCP/GTP acceleration. We are now seeing that the challenge of deploying LTE networks can be easily overcome with Gilat's satellite backhauling. Before we close the webinar, I'd like to take a couple of questions. Just 1 minute, please. Okay, we don't have much time left, so we'll just take a couple questions. First, do you have support for SCPC? Well, sure, the same Capricorn VSAT that we're talking about can be configured for TDMA or SCPC in the inbound for up to 100 megabits per second. I'll take another question. Satellite backhauling has always been the last resort. Have you seen money made from satellite backhauling? Sure, absolutely, and I'll let Mr. Keren elaborate on this point.
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, obviously, as we demonstrated in the business case just a couple of minutes ago, when we're looking at profitability, the MNO is definitely looking at what profit factor they have in regard to the ARPU, to the average revenue per user. We looked at about 24, in this particular example, we look only at $24 average revenue per user. But what happens in areas where let's say the ARPU is less, let's say $13? That means that you don't really have to deliver, you don't have to buy 100 to deliver at that point 100 megabit per second user experience. You can lower it and therefore lower the amount of bandwidth that you buy, therefore maintaining profitability even if we provide 50 megabit per second user experience in areas where you have very low ARPU. Also, it's very important to understand that at this particular time and place, all the stars had been aligned. First, we have the technology to support high throughput with the new VSAT and ground equipment. Secondly, we're able to deploy TDMA technology over satellite, and that's relatively new, supporting those speeds. And third, we're seeing a major reduction in actual cost of space segment. So putting all these factors together, today we're able to almost deliver terrestrial quality type of throughput over satellite at prices that are not different than, let's say, microwave and in many cases even fiber, whilst at the same time delivering user experience that is expected for LTE. So the answer, is it economically viable? Yes, definitely it is, and we're even willing to prove it. So if you represent a particular MNO, we'll be more than happy to meet with you and actually show you how that's done in your particular case.
Thank you. We will respond individually to other questions that were raised. Please don't hesitate to contact us with any additional questions or required clarifications. To summarize, I would like to reiterate that given all we've been saying, you can be confident that Gilat satellite backhauling will enable you to overcome the LTE deployment challenge. A recording of this webinar will be available soon on our website, www.gilat.com. We would like to thank you for attending. Enjoy the rest of your day.